Hey there, everybody, and welcome to the stream. Get things set up here. All right. So we're here today to talk about the probable cause affidavit in the Delphi case, and we're going to go over it basically line for line and kind of figure it out as we go because there were a lot of confusing points in the affidavit for me. But before we get to that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Idaho case. There was an interesting thing that came out today, an interview given by one of the parents of the victims. I'd like to just watch a little bit of it. I'm not going to play the whole video, but I think it's interesting some of the details he gives about the case. So let's just watch a little bit of it.
3 weeks since 4 University of Idaho students were brutally stabbed to death inside their home, and investigators still have not named a suspect.
Officials are combing through thousands of tips, crime scene photos, and evidence.
The father of one of those victims, Kaylee Conclave, is now revealing the manner of death for his daughter and her friend Maddie were different, leading him to believe one of them may have been the target. The heartbroken dad, Steve Conclave, joins us now. Steve, before we start this interview, I just want you to know how much our hearts go out to you. That I know from what I'm hearing from people everywhere that they are with you, they're praying for you, and they're also hoping for justice to come sooner rather than later for your daughter and her friends. You mentioned here, you talked about the manner in which Kaylee and Maddie were killed is different. And what does that tell you, and what are the police telling you that means?
There's a couple things that tell me with common sense, but I'm not a professional, so I want to specify that. But they've said the entry point was the slider or the window. It was in the middle floor. So
is the quality okay, everybody? I can't tell, but it looks like it's kind of low quality on my side.
to me, he doesn't have to go upstairs. His entry and exit are available without having to go upstairs or downstairs. Looks like he probably may have not gone downstairs. We don't know that for sure, but he obviously went upstairs. So I'm using logic that he chose to go up there when he didn't have to. And I can kind of tell by my daughter's texts, messages. She did call 911. She wasn't saying anything along the lines of like she had heard something or she was in fear. So I'm just putting the dots together. As far as the investigators, they're very tight-lipped and they're keeping everything close to their vest. And I understand that, and I'm probably not the right person to share all these things with. So I'm just trusting them that their case is super tight and they don't really need to reach out to the community. And, all the evidence is right there in that home.
So, Steve, and I want to be respectful, as I can tell you're trying to walk this tightrope as well with law enforcement, but the desire to know and get some type of action.
So like I said, I'm not going to play the whole video. I'll link this in the chat if you guys want to check it out. But I think it's interesting that he talks about how the attacks weren't the same for Kaylee and Maddie. There's been some other things that were talked about. I think Xana's mother did an interview, but I haven't really had a chance to go too deep into that, so I don't want to talk about it quite yet. So anyway, that being said, let's kind of move into the Delphi probable cause affidavit. Now where'd my pen go? There it is. Before we get too far into it, I just wanted to kind of look at the map. You guys can see that pretty well. I just wanted to look at the map and kind of clarify a couple of the locations because I was a little bit confused. So, as far as I can tell, when they're talking about the parking area across from Mears Farm, they're talking about this area. Go ahead and just call this Mears Farm. They will mention this in the affidavit, so let's just kind of draw a little map looking at it. And this, excuse me, this over here is where they're getting their video from. Oh, a pen, yeah, it is a pen. But this is where they're getting their security footage from for the cars driving up and down 300 North. So let's go ahead and call that camera. Sorry, my handwriting is terrible, you guys. Let me make that pen a little smaller. Camera facing 300 North. And that's right there. We have over here is the Freedom Bridge. Over here. We have way down here the Monon High Bridge. I know it looks far away, but it's not as far as it looks on the map. And this was the most confusing for me, but I think when they talk about the CPS building, it's in this parking lot. Although in the map that I pulled up on Google Maps, there's no building there anymore. But from what I can understand, that's where everybody's saying the CPS building where the car was allegedly seen. All right, those were the biggest areas of the map that I kind of was confused about, specifically the CPS building over here. But okay, so that's enough clarifying of the map. Let's move right into the probable cause. On this first page, they're basically just kind of talking about the bridge itself. We're going to skip all this stuff. I'm sure you guys have seen other videos talking about this affidavit, so we're just going to get right into the statements. Why park so far away? I agree, why park so far away? And we'll get into that towards the end of the affidavit. They start talking about how a man was seen later on the last page. So let's start right here. Basically just setting up the where the bridge is located. The bridge is approximately a quarter mile long. But they also mention the Freedom Bridge quite a lot in this affidavit. And remember, we looked at that. Freedom Bridge is over here. They talk about Old Country 300 North. That's the road that that camera is facing. Okay, the second page of the affidavit is where we get into some of the interviews and the witness statements. Okay, they say through interviews, reviews of electronic records, and review of the video of that store that we talked about, investigators believe that the victims were dropped off across from the Mears farm. Remember, that was that parking area at 1:49 p.m. So just really quickly, let's make some notes here. All right, let's start with a timeline. So they said at 1:49, Abby and Libby dropped off. At Mears Farm. It's 1:49 p.m. Sorry, I got the sniffles a little bit. It's really cold in my house today. There used to be a building there. Okay. They talk about where Mears Farm is located. We just spoke about that. And a video on victim 2's phone shows that at 12:13, the two victims encountered a male subject on the southeast portion of the high bridge. The male ordered the girls down the hill. We've all seen that. No witnesses saw them after this time. So that's at 2:13. No outgoing communications were found on the phone after this time. Just jot that down really quick in the notes. They said 2:13 was the last outgoing message. So let's just put that down here somewhere. 2:13 p.m. last message. Well, it's a video, not a message, but you know what I mean. Okay. Okay, they talk about the video that they recovered from victim 2, I assume would be Libby, of Abby walking southeast on the high bridge while a male subject wearing a dark jacket and jeans walks behind her. As the male subject approaches Abby and Libby, one of the victims mentioned gun. That's interesting because you'll find out later in the affidavit that the arrest was really initiated by the ballistics from a firearm. So, near the end of the video, a male is seen and heard telling the girls down the hill, guys down the hill. That's interesting because we've always known the police had more video than what they released to the public, but we've heard him say guys down the hill. We never knew that we had seen him as well. So maybe there's a closer image of him that they didn't release because maybe he's holding a weapon or something like that. But that's kind of interesting. The girls then proceed down the hill and the video ends. A still photograph taken from the video and the guys down the hill audio was subsequently released to the public to assist the investigators in identifying the male. We've all seen that short video and the audio clip. Absolutely chilling. All right. They were ruled as a homicide. And clothes were found in the Deer Creek belonging to the victims, just south of where the bodies were located. Also, a .40 caliber unspent round less than 2 feet away from victim 2's body. The round was unspent and had extraction marks on it. Now that's important. We're going to talk about the extraction marks a little bit later once we finally get through all this probable cause. But just remember, had extraction marks on it. Interviews were conducted with, let's change the color of the highlight for this. 3 juveniles. Now when I first read through this, this was an area I was a little bit confused about because it was hard, since the names are redacted, it's hard to see who's saying what. And I don't mean like identification wise, I just mean like which person is saying what. And after reading it a few times, I noticed something that was interesting. And I don't know if anybody else has noticed this before, but it seems like this is 3 juveniles and 2 other people. And those 2 people, I think, are probably adults. Oops, adult, that's how you spell it. Because otherwise they would have listed them as juveniles. So I don't know if anybody else has made that connection in their heads, but it helped me to understand who says what here. So I'm just going to assign these 2 different people a color. One's yellow, one's green. Let's go back to our regular highlighter. So we'll say that the group is orange, the juveniles are blue, and 2 adults yellow and green. So they advised they were on the high bridge on the day that the crime took place. They were walking toward the Freedom Bridge to go home when they encountered a male walking from the Freedom Bridge to the high bridge. I think we can assume this would be one of the juveniles. Described the male as kind of creepy, and he was wearing blue jeans, a really light blue jacket, hair was gray, maybe a little bit brown, didn't show his face. So that was one person's description of the man that they encountered. And she also said that the jacket was a duck canvas type jacket. Now, I own some Carhartt jackets because I live in a really cold place. In fact, it's freezing out right now. But I would say that the Carhartt material could definitely be described as a duck canvas type jacket. I think that this would be one of the juveniles, but a different one because they specifically kind of changed the name here. So a different juvenile said hi to the man, but he just glared at them, didn't respond. She recalls him being in all black and had something covering his mouth. But that's a little bit different than what the other person said they saw. So let's just kind of move on through that. She said he wasn't very tall and he had a bigger build. Not bigger than 5'10". So that was another witness's description. Now let's go ahead and change. See, this is where I'm not sure if it could be green or yellow or another one of the juveniles saying this, but you know what? Let's just assume they're talking about all three of these juveniles at first. So the other juvenile said he was wearing a black hoodie, black jeans, and black boots. So that's two of them that said he was wearing all black. And one of them said a really light blue jacket and blue jeans. I guess blue jeans, if they're dark enough, could be confused for black jeans, but anyway. She also stated that he had his hands in his pockets. That's interesting because if this is Bridge Guy that they encountered, we all know what he may have been hiding in his pockets. This, I believe, would be one of the adults. So let's say Yellow showed investigators photographs she took on her phone while she was out on the trail that day. We have no times to add to our notes, do we? No timestamps to add to the notes. But we do have potentially 5 witnesses. Let's move on to the next page. Okay, the photographs included one photo of the High Bridge taken at 12:43 p.m. and another taken at 1:26 of the bench on the east side of the Freedom Bridge. Yellow then advised that after she took the photo of the bench, they started walking back toward the Freedom Bridge, and that was when they encountered the man who matched the description of Bridge Guy. So we got a timestamp now. At 1:26, they took a picture of the bench and then started walking back towards the Freedom Bridge. So let's just say 1:26, they encountered who they think is Bridge Guy. 1:26, witnesses see Bridge Guy at Freedom Bridge. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Okay, let's move on here. Get rid of that little mark there. Are we still on yellow? We are not on yellow. Let's switch that back. Okay. Yellow described the man she encountered on the trail as wearing a blue or black windbreaker jacket. That's another mention of the black or blue jacket. The jacket had a collar, and he had his hood up from clothing underneath his jacket. Sorry, you guys, my dog's being a little restless right now. You're okay, buddy. There you go. Okay. She advised he was wearing baggy jeans and was taller than her, that she came up approximately to his shoulder height. So we already found out earlier that he was about, loving the highlighters, wonder how long it would take to fast walk back to the crime scene from a parked car. We're going to get into that, Moonlight. towards the end, we're going to talk about how long certain walks would take. It's all speculation though, because we all walk different speeds. But I have a pretty good idea about how fast people generally walk, because a few years ago I hiked the Appalachian Trail, and even when I was hiking the trail, I very rarely averaged 3 miles an hour. I know the walking is probably a lot harder when you're hiking through mountains than walking on pavement, and I'm sure he was probably walking pretty quickly from the crime scene to the parked car. But later on, we're going to find out that he or somebody was witnessed at the time he should have been there, and that's going to be in the last page of the affidavit. So she advised that, this is back to yellow, but she advised that one of the juveniles, remember we discussed that on the last page, said hi to the man and that he said nothing back. Back to yellow, because this is who's talking right now, is yellow. He was walking with a purpose, like he knew where he was going. And, you know, speculating, I think it's easy to speculate that Bridge Guy did know where he was going and he did have a purpose, because the timing is just, you'll see later on, the timing is just too perfect for this to be like an opportunity kind of thing. I don't want to get too far ahead of us, so let's just kind of keep going through this. She stated he had his hands in his pockets. Again, we heard about that, and he kept his head down. She advised he did not get a good look at his face, but believed him to be a white male. After they encountered the male, they continued their walk and presumably went home. So that was between 3 and 5 witnesses right there. It's hard to put an exact number on it. I believe it's 5. But it's interesting that Green didn't actually happen to say anything. So maybe, you know, it's one adult, one older child who may be above 18, and 3 juveniles. I don't know. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Let's keep going. Page 3. He definitely would have been pumped with adrenaline, especially if the description that we're going to hear later on is true. Yeah, he would not be someone who's walking slowly, that's for sure. All right, we're moving on to a new witness now. What color do we give this? Let's give her pink. Investigators spoke with Pink, who advised she was on the trail on the day of the crime. Video from the Harvest store captured Pink's vehicle at 1:46. Let's take a look at the map really quickly. So again, we said that's the camera here that we're talking about. Right over here is the camera we're talking about. And this is the parking spot that this witness is going to park at. After parking, this is the route she's going to be taking to the High Bridge. I looked on Google Earth earlier. Actually, I have to go look at it again. We'll wait till we get there on the affidavit. But anyway, this is the camera. This is where she's going to park, and this is the path she's going to take. Oh, that's close. All right, 1:46. Got to remember to put that in our notes. 1:46. Witness. Let's just say this is witness number 2, because we'll group all of that first interaction into one witness group. So witness number 2 parks at Mears Farm. I also want to say we can pretty much assume that 1:46 is the time she parks there, because she's captured here at 1:46, and from this camera to this parking lot is only like 0.17 miles, and in a car that's almost nothing. So you know what, we could add a minute just to say she parks the car, she gets out of the car, and she starts heading down the trail. So let's say 1:47. get rid of the map, move back to the highlighter. Okay, she parked there but around 146 at the entrance. Entrance across from the Mears farm. She advised she saw those 4 juvenile females walking on the bridge over 25. That would be the previous witness group 1 that we talked about. It's interesting that she says 4 juvenile females. Maybe it was 3 juveniles, 1 person that might have been over 18, because they weren't listed. It says 3 juveniles in the previous group and 2 adults, and then obviously 1 adult there. Anyway, doesn't matter again, so let's keep going. Walking on the bridge over Old State 25 as she was driving underneath it on her way to go park. So that means that she was, take a closer look here, driving under the Freedom Bridge. I'm not sure if you can just get off. Oh, maybe she was driving, I don't know. I'm not entirely sure where she was driving. Oh, I see. She was here. Okay. So she was driving through here so that she could come up this way and then down to go park over here. Okay. That makes sense. Sorry, I'm kind of walking myself through all this as we go too. I've read this over a few times, but still, you know, the fact that names are redacted, it kind of gets a little bit confusing. Like I said, who's saying what? So you have great videos and theories, dude. Thank you, Ditch Comfort. I appreciate it so much. Okay, let's move on through this. We're still pink? Yes, we're still pink. There were no other cars parked in the Mears farm when she parked her car. She was the only one at that parking space. That's important because later on the prosecution is going to say that Richard Allen was the only male matching the description in the area at that time. Okay? There were no other cars parked there. Now she walks to the high bridge and observes a male matching the one from victim 2's video, a white male wearing blue jeans and a blue jean jacket. He was standing on the first platform of the Monon High Bridge, only 50 feet from her. So she got close enough. 50 feet is not far. She advised she turned around at the bridge and continued her walk. Let's stop there for a second. I did think about this earlier. Come into maps here. Why is that not erasing? There we go. Okay. What was I going to say here? Oh, I lost my train of thought there. But anyway, well, I'm sure I'll remember. So she walks down the trail to the bridge, sees the man who matches Bridge Guy's description, turns around and walks back to her car. Approximately halfway between the bridge and the parking area, she walks by 2 girls walking towards the high bridge. She believes that they were the 2 victims. And I was confused at this part too. This next part coming up. Let me get a different color highlighter here. This is another area that the investigators are talking about, which coincides with this witness's testimony. Okay? Video from the store at 149 shows a white car matching someone's description traveling away from the entrance across Mears Farm. Well, we already know, right, from our notes here, that Abby and Libby were dropped off at 1:49 p.m. This white car, I believe, is who dropped Abby and Libby off, and they're just showing the judge who would be reading this probable cause in order to sign the arrest warrant, showing him or her that her statement coincides with the video evidence we have from the hardware store of the girls arriving at 1:49 p.m. But you can see here how it got a little bit confusing because they switched who they were talking about, and because it's redacted, it was hard for me to follow. Bridge guy is on his way to a meeting, which makes me think that the Anthony Shots aspect will come into play if and when the evidence comes up. Yes, I agree with you. It seems like Bridge Guy knew where he was going, and if that's the case, it's hard to imagine that the Anthony Shots account doesn't come into play. Cheers from Norway. By the way, I believe this is a real weak case. Also, the gun, or not the gun, but the bullet is so crappy. Okay, Ditch Comfort, I hope you stick around to the end because we're going to talk about the firearm, the unspent round, and ballistics in general. And we're going to talk about how it's going to be hard to convince a jury about it. So hopefully you stick around to the end. We just got to really kind of power through all of this text on the probable cause here. But I promise you we will talk about that. Okay. So, what color are we here? Purple, pink. Okay. Pink advised, we're talking about Pink again, that she finished her walk and saw no other adults. That's an important aspect other than the male on the bridge. Her vehicle is seen on the video at 2:14 p.m. leaving westbound from the trails. Okay. So, before I forget again, let's go into notes at 2:14, 2:14. At 2, dang, I'm never on the right layer. At 2:14 p.m., witness 2 leaves the trails. And we know that, again, if we look at that map, it's not a very far drive. Where's my map here? It's not a very far drive from the camera to the trail. So if she is on camera leaving at 2:14, it's pretty reasonable to assume that she finished her walk at 2:13 maybe. Run my notes here. Okay. So she started her walk at 1:47, finished her walk at 2:13, let's say. That's 26 minutes, I think. 27 minutes, let's say. So it took her 27 minutes to walk to the bridge and back. Oh, I'm running out of space here. I think that's right. About 27 minutes. If they found his fingerprint on the round, I'm pretty sure that would have been in the probable cause affidavit. I mean, that's more identifiable, more damning evidence than just the ballistics that we're going to talk about. Okay, so remember, witness 2 encountered Abby and Libby halfway back. So this 27-minute walk is to and from. It's in both directions. So if we split that in half, it'll give us approximately how much time it takes to walk to the bridge from the parking lot. So that's like 13 minutes. 13 minutes one way. So witness 2 walked 13 minutes to the bridge and then saw Abby and Libby on the way back about halfway. So let's say 7 minutes back, halfway back to the parking lot where she would have encountered the girls. That's 20 minutes. And the girls arrived at 1:49. So that would be at 2:09 they encountered. Let me know if my math is right there, but let's say 2:09, witness 2 sees Abby and Libby. I gotta start writing smaller. Got plenty of room up on top. I can just move everything up if I have to. And we know 213 was the last time that they encountered Bridge Guy. Moonlight, that's a great point. Obviously, what we're looking at and going over here in the probable cause is not all the evidence they have. And it's interesting because I've been researching a cold case for tomorrow, and there's a very similar, it's similar to this case in the way that they have evidence. And in my opinion, they have a lot of it. They have more evidence than they have in the Delphi case, in this cold case I'm talking about. But they still haven't made any arrests because there is a big difference between enough evidence to arrest and enough evidence to convict. And I believe that what we have as the public is enough evidence to arrest. And you can rest assured that law enforcement has enough evidence to convict. Otherwise, I don't think they would have made this arrest. And I think that the cold case I'm going to talk about tomorrow will help support that argument. Anyway, let's try to get through this before I forget where I'm at again. Oh no, I have a stray mark. There it is. We're good with the maps. Let's move back into the affidavit. Pink. Okay, so got the timestamps down. So Pink advised that when she was leaving, she noted a vehicle was parked in an odd manner at the old CPS building. It was not odd for vehicles to park there, but it was odd because of the manner it was parked. That's important. It was backed in near the building. I don't have a picture of the building, but I did see a video. I don't have it pulled up right here. Do I? I do. I saw a video from the mob crew, Monsters Under Our Bed, who talks about he's got like a dated picture of the CPS building, and he talks about how this car could be mistaken for some of the ones the witnesses saw. So I'm gonna go ahead and link that video for you guys to go check out if you want to get a better understanding of that CPS building. He does a great job talking about it. Okay, so what we got from Pink is she saw someone on platform 1 matching the description of Bridge Guy at approximately, what time did we say? I guess we never talked about when she saw Bridge Guy. So if she started her walk at 1:47 and it takes 13 minutes to get to the point on the bridge, then she saw Bridge Guy. Hey, I'm finally learning. I'm going to the right layer, you guys. Witness 2 saw Bridge Guy at at 2 o'clock, right? So 9 minutes. Okay, we got to move some stuff around here, you guys. Let's take this, slide it on down here. Got some tricks. Okay, so I don't want to learn more. At 2 o'clock, witness 2, sorry, sees Bridge Guy. At 2:09, witness 2 sees Abby and Libby. At 2:13, oops. Last message. Okay, I think we got the timeline ironed out a little bit here. I'm pretty sure that that's all we can get out of Pink for right now. All right, where's my brush? What color should we use next? How about red? Let's use red. Investigators received a tip from, not the right layer again, received a tip from Red, in which he stated he was on his way, next page, on his way to Delphi. Am I not on the right layer here? There I am. At 2:10. Around 2:10. He observed a purple PT Cruiser, or a small SUV, parked on the south side of the old CPS building. We gotta pop that in our notes here, because that car was still there at 2:10. We're gonna say PT Cruiser. We'll all remember what that means. Back to our red pen, our red highlighter. It appeared as if it was backed in to conceal the license plate. I mean, that's a little speculative, but I can imagine that, if more than one local who drives by this area all the time, I assume that, excuse me, for instance, the witness number 2, she probably walks those trails all the time. So for more than one person to not only notice this car, but notice it was parked in a strange way, obviously there's something there. This person speculates it was to conceal the license plate. I think that's pretty fair to assume. So let's move on. So this is, I think, both of the witness number 2, and now I guess we'll call him witness number 3, Red. Both drew diagrams of where they saw the vehicle parked, and their diagrams generally matched as to the area that the vehicle was parked and the manner it was parked. Okay. I think that we're getting into yet another witness. So let's move to another color. This person advised seeing a smaller, dark-colored car parked at the old CPS building. He described it as being a smart car. It's interesting because smart car and a small SUV, I don't think you would confuse those two, but I guess, driving by from a distance, I can imagine, excuse me, I can imagine that it would be, it'd be hard to tell, especially if you don't expect this kind of thing. It's kind of like you're thinking about it in memory. So I can imagine that that's a hard thing to do. So anyway, let's move on to the time they say. That's at 2:28. I imagine this person Ditch Comfort. I did not see Delphi After Dark. I'll have to check that out though. There's so many different twists and turns in this case that it's hard to follow. It really is. So anyway, at 2:28, orange was seen on the Hoosier Harvestor video. So let's pop in there. 2:28 was the smart car. The car was still there at 2:28, regardless of the description. 2:28, smart car. So the car was still there at 2:28. We're red right now, right? Oh no, we're orange. Okay, now we're getting to the part. Yeah, exactly. Perhaps you're not a car person at all. And when you're driving by, now keep in mind, beside this parking lot is a pretty fast-moving highway. So what if some of these witnesses were on that side, looking at the car? It's even, an even faster glimpse of what could be a car that in any other situation is completely not even like really mentionable. It's just a car parked in a parking lot. So you're right about that. Okay, so now we're getting into another pretty interesting part. Let's move to blue. A new witness who stated that she was traveling east on 300 North. So she was traveling, just quickly pull the map up really quick. She was traveling this direction on 300 North. Okay. And observed a male subject walking west, so opposite of the direction that she's walking, away from the Monon High Bridge. She advised that the male subject was wearing a blue-colored jacket, blue jeans, and was muddy and bloody. It appeared he had gotten into a fight. This is what I was talking about earlier, Ditch Comfort. When I think it was you who had mentioned you think he would have been walking with like his adrenaline would be pumping. And that's what I'm saying. This guy was seen. Write this down before I forget. What time was that? Okay. Blue was on the store at approximately 3:57. So that's all the way down here. $3:57. How do we say that? Witness sees muddy and bloody male. Interestingly, according to her testimony here, or according to her statement here, this muddy and bloody individual was walking from the trail where Witness 2 parked. Remember Witness 2? This male was walking from that trail area up the road toward the CPS building, where they allege Richard Allen's 2016 Ford Focus was parked. Okay? Let's move back to our original color highlighter here. I think we're done with witness testimony for now. Through the interviews, electronic data, photographs, and video from the Hoosier Harbor Store, investigators determined that there were other people on the trail after 2:13. Those people were interviewed, and none of those individuals encountered the male subject referenced above. Further, none of those individuals witnessed victim 1 or victim 2. So, what they've set up so far is that that's true, Moonlight. Lots of people don't know the different models of car, but I was more saying that a smart car, I can show you a picture of one if you've never seen one, but it's really small. And even the smallest SUV is much bigger than a smart car. But I do agree with you that the car's in a strange angle. People are moving by quickly. Not everyone knows a lot about cars. There's a lot of different things that can impact someone's memory of what car they saw. And again, nobody that saw this car thought that they were going to need to recall this car. Okay? So anyway, so far in the probable cause, they're setting up the fact that Richard Allen, well, they haven't set that up yet, but they're setting up the fact that Bridge Guy was at the Freedom Bridge. What time did we say they saw him at? (1:26). He was at Freedom Bridge. And then by 2 o'clock, he has made it to Platform 1, because Witness 2 sees him at Platform 1. And then at 3:57, he's seen leaving the area. And now they're setting up the fact that no other males were seen there, and beyond that, no one saw the victims or Bridge Guy during that time. I'm going to switch the color again because, I like all the different colors. All right. So now we're going to move on to an interview Richard Allen gave in 2017. Richard Allen, by his own admission, as far as I can tell, stated that he was on the trail between 1:30 and 3:30. He parked at the old farm building. And quickly, I'm just going to move down here and point out that they believe he was referring to the former CPS building instead of the old Farm Bureau. And walked to the new Freedom Bridge. We know that because that coincides with witness statements. While at the Freedom Bridge, he saw 3 females. He noted one was taller and had brown or black hair. He did not remember description, nor did he speak with them. He walked from the Freedom Bridge to the High Bridge. Again, that makes sense according to the evidence they've put forward so far. So he's telling the truth so far. He did not see anybody. That's the first time where that comes into question, although he stated he was watching a stock ticker on his phone while he walked. So I guess he's insinuating that people could have walked by and him not notice, I guess. I used to have Robinhood, and you do get sucked into those stock tickers. But either way, that's a pretty poor excuse. He stated there were vehicles parked at the High Bridge trailhead, but he did not pay attention to them, didn't take any photos or videos. This stuff is all identification for cell phones. The IMEI is a way that they can track cell phone movement, from what I understand at least. So from his own testimony, we got that he was on the trail between 1:30 and 3:30. He parked by the CPS building, which is where the vehicle was that was parked strangely. He walked from the Freedom Bridge, witnesses saw him there, to the High Bridge, witnesses saw him there. And he noted that there were vehicles parked at the High Bridge trailhead. And now, I don't know which trailhead he's talking about there. I assumed he was talking about over here by Mears Farm. But there is an area to park over here, it seems. By the trail itself, maybe. That I don't know, but I just assumed we were talking about the Mears Farm when they said the trailhead. Alright. I think we got everything we needed to out of that. Let's move on to page 5. This is where they're talking about it was not there. The CPS building is not a farm building, and it never has been. And the investigators believe that the females he saw, remember we talked about this, included this one. Oh, that was the wrong color. Blue was the 3 juveniles. It was yellow. Included yellow, and I think green was the other one. So there's kind of just a little bit more evidence pointing at 3 juveniles and not 4 up there. They were leaving the trail, the timer reported getting to the trail, and the descriptions the 3 females gave. Investigators discovered Richard Allen owned 2 vehicles, importantly, a 2016 black Ford Focus and a 2006 gray Ford 500. Investigators observed a vehicle that resembled his Ford Focus on the Hoosier Harbor Store video at 1:27 p.m. traveling westbound on 300 North, Country Road 300 North in front of the Harbor Store, which coincided with his statement that he arrived around 1:30. We got that covered on the notes. Investigators note witnesses described the vehicle parked at the CPS building as a PT Cruiser, a small SUV, or a smart car. Investigators believe these descriptions are similar in nature to a 2016 Ford Focus. And again, I can agree with the PT Cruiser and the small SUV in different circumstances resembling it. I have some reservations about the smart car, but that's okay. On October 13th, Richard Allen was interviewed again by investigators. Yeah, exactly, Ditch Comfort. anyone, maybe because we all are interested in true crime and we know you have to be focused on your surroundings, but I think that anyone with common sense would notice someone walking by them on a trail in the woods, no matter how enveloped they were in their phone, you know? Just kind of weird. Anyway, October 13th, Richard Allen was interviewed again by investigators. He advised that he was on the trails on February 13th. He saw the juvenile girls on the east of the Freedom Bridge. Those are the ones that saw someone who was kind of creepy, wearing blue or black clothes. And that he also went onto the High Bridge. By his own admission, he was on the High Bridge on Platform 1. And he was there, according to him, to watch the fish. Later in his statement, he said he walked out to the first platform of the bridge, and then he said he walked back, sat on a bench, and then left. He parked his car on the side of an old building. We know that to be the CPS building. He told investigators he was wearing, this is interesting, he was wearing blue jeans and a blue or black Carhartt jacket with a hood. And he may have been wearing some type of head covering. He claimed he saw no one else except for those girls on the Freedom Bridge. He admitted to owning firearms and that they are currently at his home. They spoke to Richard Allen's wife. Excuse me. She confirmed that Richard did have guns and knives at the residence, and that Richard still owns a blue Carhartt jacket. Okay, so now we're going to start talking about the search warrant, but this is basically set up the fact that he was there. By his own admission, he was there. He was on the bridge. He was seen on the bridge literally minutes before the bridge guy video. Dressed as the bridge guy. And he says he walked back, sat on a bench, and left, but police have already said there were other people on those trails that did not see that man sitting on a bench until 3:30. Because remember, he's seen, what time did we say he was seen? He sees, the witness number 2 sees bridge guy on the High Bridge at 2 p.m. So he's saying that between 2 and 3:30 p.m. he was sitting on a bench on the trails. No other witnesses can corroborate that story. I'm going to get into the do you feel they're talking about two different people or just giving confusing statements or whatever? It depends on which part of the probable cause you're talking about. I think in some areas they're talking about two different people, or they're maybe talking to someone and then they're incorporating testimony or statements from other witnesses, and obviously for good reason redacting their names, but it does lead to like some confusing, when you're just reading a whole block of text, it can be confusing. Okay. So anyway, I will be covering, you can see right here, I will be covering the defense's response to the probable cause. This is already going to be kind of long, and I do want to talk about ballistics later on, so probably going to save that for another stream. But I do think it's interesting that he still, potentially, still owns the clothes he was wearing on that day. Watching fish, yeah, I know. It's kind of high up to be watching fish, huh? In a creek. But anyway, I've never been there. Who knows? Maybe people throw food off that bridge to feed fish or something. Who knows? Okay, let's get into the search warrant. Change the color again. Where's yellow? There's yellow. Good old yellow. Okay. The Indiana State Police in 2022 performed an analysis. Oh wait, I skipped a paragraph. I'm sorry, you guys. In 2022, investigators executed a search warrant of Richard Allen's residence in Delphi, Indiana. Among other items. That's an important phrase right there. Among other items. I'm curious to know what other items there are, but anyway, they located jackets, boots, various weapons, including a P226 40 caliber pistol. Remember, the unspent round they found was a 40 caliber round. Okay? Just keep that in your mind for the conversation we're going to have after the probable cause. After receiving these items from the search warrant, the Indiana State Police performed analysis on that P226. The laboratory performed a physical examination, a classification, function test, a barrel and overall length measurement, test firing, ammunition component characterization, microscopic comparison, and nibbing. One interesting, I assume when there's, this is complete assumption, but when there's a firearm involved in a crime and they're going to use it for forensics, I assume that they go through all of these steps, right? They test the firearm that they've recovered with all of these different forensic tests. If that's not the case, I think it's very interesting that test firing was done in the testing of this particular firearm. Again, I don't know how the forensic examination, if there's a standard procedure when handling that kind of evidence. So just thought it was kind of interesting to think about. Let's talk about the laboratory's determination. They determined that the unspent round, got to be on the right layer, that the unspent round that was located next to victim 2 had been cycled through Richard M. Allen's P226. The laboratory goes on to remark that an identification opinion is reached when the evidence exhibits an agreement of class characteristics and a sufficient agreement of individual marks. Keep these phrases in your mind. Class characteristics, individual marks. Sufficient agreement is related to the significant duplication of random, striated, or impressed marks as evidence by the correspondence of a pattern or combination of patterns of surface contours. That's a lot of words, but basically they're saying, based on marks and impressions, on the piece of evidence and the tests they did with that piece of evidence, the marks are similar enough for an identification opinion to be reached. The interpretation of identification is subjective in nature. Interesting to point that out. And based on the relevant scientific research and the reporting examiner's training and expertise. We're going to talk all about this right after we get through the rest of this probable cause. We have this page and then one more page, and then we're going to start talking about that. Investigators ran the firearm, found that it was purchased by Richard Allen in 2001. Richard Allen voluntarily came to the police station to speak with investigators. He never allowed anyone to use or borrow the P226. When asked about the unspent bullet, he had no explanation why the bullet was found, where it was found. He again admitted that he was on the trail, but denied knowing the victims and denied any involvement in the crime. It's very strange to me how forthcoming he's being and how his story lines up with all the evidence until 2009, let's say, until the last time he's seen by witness number 2. Mr. Deek Seeks, we're going to be talking about that. I have a peer-reviewed paper that we're going to be talking about here in a few minutes, specifically about that. Obviously, I'm no firearms expert either. you know, I do have an understanding of firearms, but I think that using information I found that's peer reviewed, it's a law paper, I think that's going to help all of us understand what exactly is going on, especially guns that are mass produced too. Yeah, you've got a point. We're going to address all of that in just a few minutes. Okay. The detectives that are redacted, been part of the investigation since it started. He's had an opportunity to review and examine the evidence, and along with other investigators, believe that the evidence gathered shows that Richard Allen is the male subject seen on the video from victim 2's phone. Further, this is important here. The victims were forced down the hill by Richard Allen and led to the location where they were attacked. Okay? They don't say here, in plain words, that Richard Allen committed the crime. A lot of the evidence we can assume that he's the only person here, but it's just interesting that they put this phrase in the probable cause affidavit. Now, investigators are very selective about what they put in the PCA, and everything they put in here has a purpose. This could be just to say that he's guilty of murder too, which in Indiana, I have another video talking about why they charged Richard Allen the way he did. I would say go check that out if you want to know more about how Indiana handles murder charges. But perhaps that phrase is in there so that it'll be easier to prove murder too. I don't know. Just interesting that they say they come out and say he did force them down the hill and led them to the location where they were then attacked. Through the statements and photographs of the juvenile females and the statement of redacted, they were at the southeast edge of the trail at 12:43, east of the Freedom Bridge at 1:26, and walked across Old State Road 25. We looked at that on the map. That was after 1:26 and before 1:46. They walked the entirety of the trail and only observed a single person, Bridge Guy. They talk about witness 2 next. She only saw one adult male, and all of them described the male in similar manners, wearing similar clothing, leading investigators to believe all 4 saw the same male individual, the only male individual. He was charged, Moonlight, he was charged with double murder. He was charged with murder 2, though, not just regular murder. Murder 2 says that somebody was murdered in the process of committing another crime, and there's a list of crimes. If you want to go check out that other video, it's on my channel. It's only like 2 minutes long, and it explains a little bit more about the charges and why I think they charged him the way they did. Because it would be, well, you'll see. Go watch the video and you'll see what I'm saying. Investigators believe the male observed by blank and blank is the same male depicted in the video is Bridge Guy, is what they're saying. The male observed by all these witnesses is Bridge Guy. Furthermore, Libby's video was taken at 2:13 p.m. and the redacted witness saw only one male while she was on the trail from 1:46 to 2:14. The only guy there. And remember, she passed Abby and Libby on the way out, so nobody could have snuck by her. He was the only male there, and those 2 girls were the only 2 other people in the general area after witness 2 left. All 3 of those individuals involved in the crime, the 2 victims and the alleged perpetrator, were there by witness testimony together. And Richard Allen's bullet, unspent round, was found at the scene. Investigators believe that Richard Allen was the male seen by the witnesses that we just spoke about and the male seen on victim two's video. They think he's the same person. Again, they reinforce that he said he was on the trail between 1:30 and 3:30, which is when the crime took place. Evidence shows that a vehicle matching the description was there at 1:27, heading towards the place where he said he parked. The clothing he told investigators he was wearing match the clothing in the bridge guy's video, and the clothing description provided by the two witnesses, or more witnesses, I'm sorry, by all the witnesses. A vehicle matching the description of his 2016 Ford Focus is seen at or around these times by witness statements at the former CPS building. Regardless of what kind of vehicle they saw, they all saw one vehicle there. Yeah, it is absolutely horrifying. And you know what I'm just thinking about that is actually, let's get through the rest of this page. Not because I'll forget, but something else that is actually, speaking of horrifying, and it's just kind of occurring to me. Okay, let's run back by this for a second. Witness 2. I gotta change my color here. Okay, black pen. Witness 2. Witness 2 sees bridge guy here. What did we say? 2:09, I think we said. Sorry, I'm so... Okay. 2 o'clock. Witness 2 sees bridge guy. So 2 o'clock, she sees bridge guy. 2 o'clock, he's here. Right? The girls arrive at 2:09 and walk down that bridge. So bridge guy, 2 o'clock. The girls arrive at roughly 2:09, walk down the bridge, and take video looking back at Abby. And there's no bridge guy there. That's 9 minutes later. Did bridge guy leave and follow witness number 2 and then see the girls and loop back around? Or more horrifyingly, did bridge guy skirt off into the side here because he knew Abby and Libby were coming? And like, oh my God, I can just kind of picture Richard Allen just like hulking around in the woods next to the bridge. That is horrifying. I had never actually thought about this before, but that's interesting. Where was bridge guy when Abby and Libby got to the bridge? Because he was there at 2 o'clock, 9 minutes before the girls got there. Mandy says, I don't think he was there alone. I think that it's a serious possibility, especially that phrase that the law enforcement used in the probable cause there. He was a lone wolf who had anonymous access to Shot's profile and knew they were coming. Yeah. It's so crazy. I agree with you, Moonlight. I do think he had, if not anonymous access to the profile itself, he at least had anonymous access to what Keegan Kline was putting out onto, into the wherever he was putting it. He definitely had information from the Anthony Shots account, in my opinion. Some days Richard Allen is bridge guy, other days he's innocent. Yeah. The strangest thing, I think, is how forthcoming he is with almost all of his testimony, almost all of his statements. He admits to having the clothes still. If they are the same clothes, which, again, they don't have to be the same clothes. He could have had multiple garments that were the same or whatever. But if they're the same clothes that investigators took with the search warrant, you have to assume that there's going to be forensic evidence on that clothes, on the boots. Okay, I'm sorry. Got a little sidetracked. Let's move on. That is an absolute horrifying realization I just had there, and I hope that... Man, I don't know. That's too much. Okay. Let's get back here. Back to the highlighter. Through his own admissions, that's important. Through his own admissions, he walked the trails and eventually hiked to the Monon High Bridge and walked out onto the High Bridge. And again, we speculate that happened around 2 o'clock. Only 19 minutes after the girls were dropped off. Wait, no, I'm sorry, 11 minutes after the girls were dropped off. He's already at the bridge. And then he disappears by 2:09 because that Instagram photo or Snapchat photo we have of Abby walking the bridge does not show anybody on platform 1. Lurking in the bush. Yeah, I know, that's horrible. Okay, people didn't see the girls not expecting what happened to happen. But again, witness 2 said there were no other cars parked at the Mears farm parking lot. So I can't imagine all the way from if someone parked at the CPS building if they could actually see, I don't know. I don't know if they could see the trail from the CPS building. Sorry, I'm still getting sidetracked here. Okay. Nobody saw Richard Allen on the trail after 2:13 p.m. Investigators identified other individuals who were there or on Country Road 300 North between 2:30 and 4:11. None of them saw a male subject matching the description of Richard Allen on the trail. So he says he's on the trail, but nobody sees him on the trail. How is that possible? Well, investigators believe Richard Allen was not seen because he was busy in the woods committing a crime. Committing the crime. An unspent .40 caliber round was forensically determined to have been cycled through Richard Allen's P226. P226 was found at his residence. He admitted to owning it. He had owned it since 2001. He said he had not been at the property where the round was found. He did not know the property owner, and he had no explanation why a round cycled through his firearm would be at that location. He never allowed anyone to use or borrow it. And investigators believe that after the crime, Richard Allen returned to his vehicle by walking down Country Road 300 North. And that's when he was seen at 3:57, muddied and bloodied. Yeah, so it seems like they have a whole lot of evidence that coincides with each other that puts Richard Allen there on the bridge at the time the crime was committed and has pretty solid witness testimony that nobody else was there. Beyond that, they have an unspent round that was forensically determined to have been cycled through Richard Allen's firearm, which he has never let anyone use, borrow, and he's owned it since 2001. I would agree that's enough information for an arrest. Let's talk about why. The ballistics. Do I have this? I hope I can link this paper to you guys. If I don't have it up right now, I will. Okay, I don't have the link for this paper, but I'll link it in the description after the stream is over. I want you guys to be able to read this. It's like a 27-page document. We're only going to go over a few of the pages that are relevant to this case. Let's highlight in purple. I don't think we've used purple yet. Ooh, that's a lot of talking. Gonna drink some water here. 1 second. Actually, before we talk about this paper, I think it would be better to kind of help explain for people who don't know much about firearms to explain exactly what happened and how they got marks. I know, a clerical error. Moonlight, that is a facepalm for sure. Anyway, I know YouTube doesn't necessarily like showing firearms on videos. This is an animation, and it's kind of a, you can see through it, which I think is pretty cool. If I make this full screen, I think you can see it pretty well. Okay. So this is a P226. Just so everybody knows, the P226 comes in a variety of calibers, as they list them right here. Remember, the unspent round that we found in the probable cause affidavit is a 40 caliber, which this one that we're about to watch is a 9mm, but the only difference between that firearm and this firearm is the diameter of the barrel, the breech. And again, let's identify some of the parts here. This is the barrel. This big piece of metal right here is the breech. And anything holding the round itself. Those things are going to be different depending on the calibers, but what's not going to be different is the firing mechanism, the firing pin, and just the mechanisms that extract and reload. So we're quickly going to watch this, and I'd just like to point out before we start, you can notice this piece of metal right here, where my cursor is. This is known as the extractor, and you'll see why in a second here as I press play. So this is the beginning of the cycle, right? The round gets jammed up into the breech here, this big piece of metal, and this piece of metal is made out of hardened steel, okay? It's designed to be able to contain the crazy amounts of pressure that happen when you actually fire a bullet through it. So it's made out of hardened metal. And you can see that this slide, as it comes back, it forces the round into the gun, and it slides on the bottom of this wedge-shaped breech. And that sliding motion, so remember, the casing of the round is brass, okay? This is hardened steel. So when the brass scrapes up against that hardened steel and forces that round into the breech, it's going to leave markings on the case. And I saw someone in the chat earlier say, all firearms of the same model will make the same marks, and that's true to an extent. When you first purchase a firearm, we're going to get into this when we look at the paper, there are different marks that the firearm will make on a round. As you use the firearm, every firearm wears in a unique way. And what I mean by that is it wears out. The more you fire it, the more wear your firearm will get, and they wear in unique ways. So the lines that this breech put onto this brass casing here can potentially be unique, okay? And we're not going to say that that's the only thing that happens, because let's watch the rest of this animation. As it shoves it forward into the breech, you can see how much force it looked like was put into that, okay? So you're going to get some impressions all around that brass. It's a soft metal, right? And now you'll notice this thing I talked about earlier, the extractor. It has a little hook on the end of it right here that sinks into this recess behind the back end of this projectile here. There's a small recess that this hook sinks into, and you can notice the gap here on the breech is just placed in a way where the hook can rest inside that recess, okay? And where this hook rests against the brass in there is also going to make a little mark, what's known as a tool mark. Let's continue on. In this animation, the round is fired, which does not apply to our scenario, but I will explain really quickly. This motion of the slide coming back after the round is fired typically is caused by the pressurized gases inside that occur when you ignite the propellant inside of the cartridge. So those gases push the slide back. In our case, what's alleged is that Richard Allen used his hand to mimic the same motion that the slide would make if you fired it, but he did not fire it. So as he pulls the slide back with his hand, the mechanism in which the slide is moving back is different, but the result is the same. So as it moves back, you can see this hook is still hooked inside behind that rim of the casing, right? And as it comes back, it's pulling the spent round out of the chamber. As it comes back to here, maybe a little more right here. Oops. Oh no. Okay. Let me try to get back to that same point. Ah, you know what? We can go right from there. Let's bring this back just to here. Sorry, you guys, I messed up. Okay, so right here you can kind of see it's a bad angle. The other angle I had it set up at was better, but behind here there's another piece of metal. You know what? I have to get to that point. Here we go. Let's just watch it again from here. Okay, it's pulled back, and right here you can see there's another piece of metal right here, separate from the extractor, that's going to make contact with the back end of this cartridge as it's being pulled out quickly. It's being pulled out quickly. And when this casing hits this piece of metal, it's going to launch it out the hole this way. Okay? You'll see that happen in 1 second. Boom, it hits the piece of metal and it launches it out and up. And then the cycle is repeated. Okay? You can see the piece of metal here. Once this round goes up into the chamber, when it comes back out, it's going to make connection with this piece of metal right here and launch it out. That impact will also leave a mark on, potentially could also leave a mark on the round. No, I think what they're suggesting is that Richard Allen either accidentally pulled that slide back and ejected around, or maybe he did it on purpose to be intimidating. For some reason, he pulled that slide back and caused the round to be ejected from the firearm. Maybe he was unloading his firearm, in which case you'd pull the magazine out and then remove the round. And then maybe he lost it on the ground and he was panicking, so he had to run away. Again, this is all speculation. We don't know what happened. We do know that there was a round found on the ground, unspent, and that the striations and marks left on the casing were enough to link it to Richard Allen's firearm. And that's what I wanted to show you guys here, is how those marks, striations, impressions, maybe they measure from where the hook has marked that recess and where the extracting, I don't know what this piece of the firearm is called, but the piece of metal that it hits to knock it out, maybe you can measure the distance between those 2 points and come up with another unique characteristic. Okay? So now that we kind of understand how those striations and marks could be made on an unspent round, let's go ahead and get this out of here. And now let's talk about ballistics in the courtroom. I'm going to quickly try to go find this source real quick. I really hate talking about a source that I don't have for you guys. So give me 1 second here. Jeez, it's far down. I knew it was a couple days ago, but I didn't realize it was this far down. Alright, we're getting close. this it? Oh, here it is. Here it is, you guys. This is the paper I'm using. I will link it in the description or in the chat really quickly, but it's a peer-reviewed, published law paper. Where's the chat at? That's a good point, Moonlight. He could have dropped it out of his pocket and not even realized. Mandy, we're about to talk about some of the markings that forensics ballistics use in the courtroom, and how manufacturers expect the markings to happen and how they actually happen. There are I think they refer in the probable cause affidavit to class markings and what else? Yeah, they refer to a couple different aspects that we're going to look into here in a second. Okay, I just really wanted to get that paper linked to you guys. So let's talk about ballistics in the courtroom. We're gonna go with orange. Forensic ballistics is the analysis of bullet and cartridge case evidence. In our case, we're going to be talking about cartridge case evidence, and the use of that evidence to link specimens to each other and to particular weapons, which is what they did in this case. They took a casing, or a bullet, but I believe more specifically the casing of that bullet, and used it to link specifically to Richard Allen's firearm. This paper will attempt to use the term forensic ballistics exclusively. At times, the term ballistics will be used for shorthand. In the world of forensics, a tool mark, it's interesting, that word was mentioned in the affidavit, refers to any mark left on any object by coming into contact with another harder object. What did we just talk about? The breech of that firearm? Remember, this part of the firearm right here, the breech where the round is sliding up into, that's hardened steel, and the casing is brass. And in fact, the bullet is soft metal as well. We're going to talk about exactly, we're going to talk about exactly how the bullet is labeled in a second here. Thank you so much, Ditch Comfort. Okay. Expert criminal laboratory technicians examine shell casings to match identifying marks to particular weapons under the assumption, it's an assumption, but under the assumption that guns leave individually indefinable marks, and if necessary, these experts will testify to that in court. The technique of firearm identification involves the expert examining the marks created on the shell casings, or the bullet, but in this case the shell casings. The bullet and shell casing come from the cartridge, which is made up of 4 main parts. Let me bring over that YouTube video here so we can kind of follow along. You can see this image of this bullet inside this mechanism here. So they're saying it is made up of 4 main parts. You have the bullet, which is the tip of it, the different colored tip here, the casing, which is the part we've been talking about, the powder, which is located inside, and the primer, which is this small circle also located inside of the projectile. So there's 4 main parts of a bullet, in case you didn't know. We today are going to be talking about the case and potentially the bullet, but mostly the case. The case is the covering that holds all of the cartridge components together. They go on to talk about the different parts, but the only one we're really concerned about right now is the casing. Okay, let's move on to page 2. When a bullet is fired, the examiner looks for the marks created by the machined metal on the barrel, the breech, the extractor, And okay, so the firing pin is not going to affect us today because the gun was not fired. But we just explained that casing comes into contact with the machined metal on the barrel breech and extractor, regardless of if the firearm is actually fired or not. After examining the projectile, they can make an identification. That's another term we saw on the probable cause affidavit of the components, concluding that they came from the same source. Okay? Let's remember, the word identification was used in the probable cause affidavit. They concluded that the test rounds in the laboratory and the one found at the crime scene came from the same firearm. Otherwise, he would have said he eliminated they did not come from the same source, or that it's inconclusive, right? That they don't know if it's hard to tell. But no. They concluded they made a positive identification. Now, in the parlance of firearm examiners, if there is sufficient agreement to make identification, another phrase we saw in the probable cause, the firearm examiner states that the chance that another firearm could have made the mark is a practical impossibility. Thank you, Moonlight. Thank you, Ditch Comfort. I appreciate you guys being here. Hope you feel better, Ditch. I've been feeling a little under the weather lately, too. I think it's because it's getting so cold out where I live. Thank you for stopping by. I really appreciate it, you guys. Tomorrow, I'm going to be covering that cold case I talked about, probably around a similar time, early afternoon, Eastern time for me. So if you can swing by, that'd be awesome. The examiner faces the challenge of identifying both class and individual characteristics. And this comes back to, who was it that said something? Mandy, you said vague recollection of something I saw years ago. Markings inside guns manufactured by the same machine progress as each one is manufactured. So that's known as a design features. And these are the challenges that the examiners face when they're talking about these forensic ballistics. That's what the manufacturer intends before the first piece of metal is processed. I'm sorry, I was talking about class characteristics. Now, this class characteristics narrow the identification to a given manufacturer, meaning this firearm was produced by, let's say, Sig Sauer, the P226. Now, all of these firearms that came off of the line at the same time using the same components will have similar class characteristics. So if you find a round on the ground that has these class characteristics, you can safely assume, or safely conclude, I should say, that that round came from this model of firearm by given manufacturer, but not to an individual firearm. That's not enough. Okay? Thousands of firearms share the same class characteristics. Now let's move into subclass characteristics. These are markings that temporarily become part of the manufacturing process and therefore create a marking on perhaps hundreds of weapons in a given production run, though they are not a permanent feature of the design. And what they mean by that is these markings, these tool marks, will wear away as the firearm is used. In effect, subclass characteristics indicate an imperfection in the method used to produce a limited number of firearms. I gotta wake my dog up. He's having a dream. Butterboy. Butterboy. Okay. He can be a very noisy dreamer, so it's best to wake him up now. Okay. Where was I? Subclass characteristics. Limited number of firearms. So those are firearms that come off the same run. They were produced in a small time frame, all of the same time frame in the same factory. Now we're getting into individual characteristics. These characteristics are what I believe they are going to use in the forensics. So individual characteristics are imparted from the actual, bear with me here, piece of the actual tool. Okay? during production. The tool, hold on, let me just make sure I understand this correctly. Whoa, that's confusing. Individual characteristics are imparted from the actual piece, the actual tool during production. Okay, that's kind of worded a little confusing for me, but I think I understand it. Finally, it's the examiner's task to is further complicated by the facts that accidental characteristics may be found in shell casings fired from the same gun. Again, our gun was not fired. And individual guns markings can change over time. That's crucial. Marks made at one period may not be there at another. That's crucial because, like I said, all firearms wear, okay? So if you have a heavily used firearm, the marks it makes earlier in its life are not going to be the same as the marks it makes towards the end of its life, okay? Everything wears out, especially in the case of firearms. Thank you, Ditch. I really think I like going into the details that not everybody talks about so much. There's always obvious parts about the case, but I like trying to get information beyond those obvious implications from details. So thank you so much for stopping by. The third girl got to go to bed. Thank you for stopping by. Hopefully you can catch us tomorrow for Cold Case Monday. Okay, so in today's world, forensic ballistics expert gather shell casings collected at crime scenes or by test firing guns, which we know they did both times. Well, technically the gun wasn't found at the crime scene. It was found at Richard Allen's house. But they test fired that firearm and collected more shell casings to create ballistic images. And we know that that is an aspect of this crime because as we go on and they talk about some of the history of this ballistic imaging thing, they talk about NIBIN, or the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network. So which categorizes records of ballistics recovered from other crime scenes. So I assume they were searching to see if this gun was used in any other crimes. That's all we need from this page. I know I have more pages here, so. They talk about the qualifications of the expert witness. There is a federal rule that they must be qualified as an expert by knowledge, skill, experience, training, and education. And they must demonstrate that to the court. Now we're going to talk about why ballistics evidence, why I believe law enforcement must have more evidence, because I think that you're skating on thin ice if you're going to try to make a conviction based solely on ballistics evidence, okay? And we're going to talk about that right now. Okay. Let's look at this phrase right here. The theory underpinning forensic ballistics is that all firearms possess distinctive features that in turn impart distinctive markings or tool marks onto projectiles and cartridge casing. And it goes on to say when the weapon is fired. But again, I demonstrated how that could be the case without it being fired. Using a microscope, which we know they used in this case, firearms examiners compare those tool marks found on projectiles and cartridge casings to determine whether they were fired from a particular weapon, generally by comparing them to ones test fired from a seized weapon, which is what happened in this case. Now into the less happy news about the ballistics, because although forensic ballistics is currently allowed in the courtroom, you have to have the testimony of a qualified or government official or occasionally academic experts. They have to testify that this information is accurate. Okay. And they have to testify that a match to the exclusion of all other weapons in the entire world has been found by their forensic investigation. Again, they talk about how they use the markings on shell casings to match to a particular weapon. And then they prove that the evidence chain of custody links the weapon with the suspect. They did that in this case. Obviously, you assume that the defense would question the expert's experience, but still, the court allows ballistic testimony if the court is satisfied with the evidence and qualifications of the expert. This here is a current admissibility of ballistic evidence as articulated by Massachusetts, and there's 4 different factors here. If it assists the jury in reaching a verdict, the defense counsel has to be furnished with the discovery. The jury is provided necessary background concerning the theory, and an opinion matching a particular firearm. So I think that all 4 of those factors are accounted for in this. And again, that's in Massachusetts, Circuit County, but this paper goes on. Last page, I promise. While these factors, excuse me, while these factors represent one circuit's current acceptance of forensic ballistics evidence, the following cases will provide a short history on challenges to the science. They go on to talk about some different cases and whatnot. So I think it's interesting that there is some, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not as identifiable as, let's say, DNA or a fingerprint. The defense can poke holes in ballistic forensics. I use Photoshop all the time. I do a lot of digital art, so I have a tablet, a drawing tablet, and I'm able to do all this stuff for you guys right on Photoshop. Mandy, have a good night. Thanks for stopping by. Make sure you check out the replay. I think what I'm going to try to do is condense the video a little bit so that people watching the replay don't have to sit there and watch me interact with chat. Maybe make things go a little faster. Have a good night, Mandy. Okay, so for the most part, I think I've covered all the things I needed to cover. Again, tomorrow I'm going to be going live again around the same time for Cold Case Monday. I have a really interesting cold case. Again, there were no arrests made, obviously, and there's a ton of evidence. I almost didn't want to share this case with you guys because it was frustrating for me to research, and I can guarantee it's going to be frustrating for you guys too. The fact that there were no arrests made. But it comes down to the same thing as to why I think they made an arrest in this case. You might have enough evidence to arrest someone, but you only get one chance to try them in a court of law. If you don't have enough evidence to convict them, or you're not completely confident that your evidence will convince someone beyond a reasonable doubt this person's guilty, then you cannot arrest them, even though the arrestable evidence is there. If you arrest them, they have the right to a speedy trial. They'll go to trial, prove reasonable doubt, and even though that they potentially are guilty, they will be acquitted. Okay? And the case we're going to cover tomorrow has a lot of these same mitigating factors that prevent police from making an arrest. Hey, nice. The Intuos. I have a Cintiq. I started with a Intuos Pro. That, yes, Mr. Deekseeks, that cartridge, if they got identifiable striations and they got identifiable alterations to the contours of that casing, that cartridge was 100% inside that weapon. And it was, because they said they're confident, based on the forensic examination, that round was cycled through Richard Allen's firearm. Thanks, Ditch. So again, I think that's it for today. I'm going to end the stream here. I appreciate all you guys coming by. I appreciate everybody. Double Jeopardy, exactly. You got to be careful. You might be internally 100% that this person or these people are guilty of something, but unless you can convince 12 random people beyond a reasonable doubt, and unless you're confident that you can do that, it does not make sense to make an arrest. And again, we're gonna delve into that tomorrow, but it says a lot for how they made an arrest in the Delphi case. They have more evidence. Just this ballistics report that I showed you guys kind of talks about some other cases that provide some challenges to people using, to prosecutors using forensic ballistics in a case. Thank you, Brenda. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I hope you guys got a lot of information out of this. I know it took me a long time to get to the probable cause affidavit, but I really like to dive into something by myself for a while and generate some ideas and generate some kind of understanding before I feel like I'm even qualified to share it with you guys. So, like I said, I hope you guys got some new information out of this. Maybe if you didn't understand the ballistics aspect of it, hopefully you got a little bit of understanding there. And again, I'm not an expert when it comes to ballistics. I feel like I did a pretty well-informed job of explaining what may or may not have happened to the unspent round. I do hope they have more than what is in the affidavit. I hope so too, Sophie. They did have enough for the arrest. Thank you so much for stopping by, Sophie. I'll see you tomorrow. The follow-up question would be, how would that cartridge get to the crime scene if Richard Allen claims to have not been there? That's an interesting question, Mr. Deek Seeks. How did that round get there? Well, by his own admission. I want to be careful when I say these things. By Richard Allen's own admission, he never let anybody use or borrow that P226. So there's two ways that round could have got there, in my opinion. Either Richard Allen was there with Libby and Abby and cycled that round through his firearm. You know, at some point, as someone else pointed out, he could have cycled it through earlier and put it in his pocket, and it fell out at the crime scene. At some point, Richard Allen cycled that round through his firearm and left it at the scene. Option 2, somebody else acquired a .40 caliber round that had previously been cycled through Richard Allen's firearm but never fired, right? Keep in mind, this round was unspent. It was never fired. So someone else would have had to acquire that round. That person would have had to have known that Richard Allen was at the area of the Monon High Bridge at that time, brought that unspent round with them in order to frame him. That seems like a huge stretch to me. So yes, I believe Richard Allen was there and at some point in that day cycled that round through his firearm. He was at the crime scene, and either he cycled it there, dropped it, and couldn't find it again, or he cycled it earlier and it fell out of his pocket. An interesting aspect would be someone else mentioned earlier the fingerprints on the firearm. I would assume that the perpetrator in this case wore gloves, but honestly, I don't know. So are there fingerprints on this round? Did he load the round with gloves on? Because when you load rounds into a pistol and you don't have gloves on, there's going to be, at the very least, a partial fingerprint on that casing, especially if it's not fired. He lost the casing there. I agree. And you know what? You can almost picture in your head someone who drops the round after they've committed the crime. They drop this on the ground, but they're already in such a panic, and his adrenaline is already pumping so high that he either doesn't find it, overlooks it, or just gives up on it. And he's like, I got to get out of here. Close enough, yeah. I believe the affidavit says that they're a quarter mile apart. Yeah, see right here, victim 1 and 2 were found in the woods approximately 0.2 miles northeast of the bridge. So the casing was found a quarter of a mile, less than a quarter of a mile from the Monon High Bridge, where bridge guy, Richard Allen, allegedly, was seen by witness number 2 at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Who was walking around with loose ammunition in their pockets? You're carrying the rounds or in your firearm or in a separate magazine. Who's walking around with loose ammunition in their pockets? It is a little bit more common where I live, especially in the town, like November time, hunting season, for people to be carrying loose ammunition, but not pistol rounds. People would be carrying loose shotgun shells or some other thing they'd be using for hunting. And in addition to that, it wouldn't be in a city park. To further your question, who's carrying rounds in their pocket at a city park? That's a whole different story. Who's cycling rounds through their gun at a city park? In the middle of the daytime, in a small community, it just doesn't make any sense. You might not have known if it dropped if you loaded another cartridge and it fell out. Well, when you load another cartridge into the firearm, I assume he's owned this firearm since 2001, so he's used it a lot. He knows that when you put another round in, the previous one comes out. I think what maybe you're saying is that he forgot that he had already put a round in the chamber, and he went to go put what he thought was the first round in the chamber, and it ended up being the second one, which then ejected the first one, and he didn't even realize it in the heat of the moment. In his mind, that was the first time he had done it. In reality, it was the second time, so he didn't even notice the round come out. That could very well be possible. Yes, Mr. Deekseeks, that's not something I would definitely know I had a round in the chamber, period. You don't even got to bring that statement anywhere past that. If I'm anywhere around a firearm, I know whether or not, well, at least if I'm in possession of that firearm, I know whether or not that there's a round in that chamber or not. That's true too, Sophie. I would like to hope I would like to hope that he didn't store his firearm loaded like that, but who knows? Obviously, he's not the most responsible person in the world. No, yeah, he's definitely not a responsible firearm owner. I can tell you that right now. It is definitely a possibility, Sophie. You know, I personally wouldn't store a firearm loaded like that for a lot of reasons, but who knows? Not everybody feels the same way about owning firearms responsibly as I do. All right, you guys, I'm gonna get out of here. I'm hungry. I need to eat something. I'm glad you guys stopped by. Like I said, I hope you got some information out of this. Tomorrow around 2 or 2:30 Eastern time, I'll be having another live show talking about the cold case, and I'm also probably going to touch on the Delphi defense, their statement they released in response to the probable cause affidavit. So thank you everybody for stopping by. Anybody who left a comment, thank you all for liking, subscribing, and I hope to catch you later. See you later, everybody.